Zach spoke about inflammation, but it's still kind of an elusive, confusing subject matter. I want to better understand it. What does it mean? Why is it so important? And what is the difference between acute inflammation, like what happens when you suffer a physical injury, and chronic inflammation, which is this persistent state that can be and often is induced by things like diet and lifestyle? And on the subject of diet, how exactly does diet itself affect the gut bacteria and in turn the immune system? And how does all of this relate to inflammation? Well, here's the wonderful Dr. Rhonda Patrick, a PhD in biomedical sciences and an expert in nutrition, metabolism, and aging, to break it all down in understandable terms.
I don't think a lot of people really do understand exactly what inflammation is. So what inflammation is referring to is it's a consequence of your immune system being activated. And once your immune system is activated, they start firing off all these chemical weapons that are called inflammatory cytokines. And these inflammatory cytokines are damage cells inside your body, damage DNA inside your body, damage pretty much everything inside of your cells.
But what's confusing to me about this is that essentially inflammation is an immune system response to something wrong in your body, right? It's your body's way of saying, let's send the ambulance out to fix whatever's wrong, whether you cut your finger or you sprained your knee. Your immune system gets activated and mobilized to then kind of visit that either localized area or general, if it's stress related or something like that, I suppose. But the idea behind it is to fix the problem, right? So on some level, doesn't it make sense that like some inflammation is good because it's your body reacting to a problem in order to fix it?
Absolutely. One of the major downstream effects of having these inflammatory cytokines and molecules being produced is they recruit other repair factors. It increases genes in your body that then start to repair damage, fix things. So it's an essential part of repair and recovery system. However, there is a difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation would be something like your 4-hour marathon run, or your 2-hour training session when you're, running and you're causing inflammation. Inflammation occurs after intense exercise. But that's good because the inflammation signals to various, genes in your body that turn on all these antioxidant genes. They turn on genes that repair muscle damage. They turn on all these good. So it's like a stress response sort of mechanism where you're turning on all the good stuff, but you need the bad stuff to turn them on. So it's kind of like, here's a little dose of this bad stuff to turn on the good stuff.
Right. So there's sort of the, exercise-induced oxidative stress that triggers the immune system response versus somebody who's just smoking cigarettes all day long, and that's causing some kind of internal damage in a number of ways that's creating just a chronic immune system response that is literally just burning your engine out, right?
Yeah, exactly. The chronic smoking actually the major source of all inflammation in the body is actually the gut. So you're talking about people that are eating unhealthy, they're not getting enough fiber, and they're doing damage in the gut, and that's causing a lot of immune cells to become active chronically every day.
So in your experience, what are the foods that create the worst sort of inflammatory response?
Well, I think it's actually more a lack of foods.
Lack of the good foods.
Than eating bad foods. Because your gut hosts the largest number of immune cells in the body. So that most of the immune cells in your body are found in your gut. You've got them in your spleen, your thymus, and you're obviously in your bloodstream. But the largest number of them are actually in your gut. The reason for that is because, your gut is exposed to the external environment. The food you eat, your gut sees it. And that can be pretty lethal if you get some bad, nasty stuff. So your immune system has to be there and ready to react to that, right? To make sure that you stay alive long enough to reproduce and pass on your genes. So in addition to immune cells being in your gut, you also have a lot of bacteria in your gut, tons and tons of bacteria. And there's people that sort of debate how many bacteria, there's 100 trillion I've seen references for,
Right.
and I haven't dug into like, is it accurate or not? I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of freaking bacteria. Okay.
10 times more microorganism than human.
Right.
What gets thrown around.
And people, that just can't, it irks them to hear people say that. And, I don't know. I've seen references that show that there are 100 trillion bacteria cells in your colon, in the, distal part of your gut. And those bacteria play a very, very important role in regulating your immune system. So you have to feed those bacteria the right types of foods in order for them. You can kind of think of them as little chemical producing factories, actually, because when you feed them the right type of food, which happens to be fiber, fiber gets digested by this bacteria in your gut, in your colon specifically, and it produces a bunch of different chemical products called short-chain fatty acids, which are little signaling molecules that tell your immune cells in your gut to become a certain type of immune cell. So they'll tell them, okay, become this type of immune cell that is involved in preventing autoimmune diseases, making sure your immune system doesn't get so ramped up that it starts to just attack everything, including your own organs. That's very important. And the type of immune cell that does that is called T regulatory cells. And T regulatory cells become T regulatory cells based on these bacteria in your gut that are producing these little products that tell it to do it. So it's very important that your gut gets fiber. And if you look at like hunter-gatherer societies, like in Tanzania, they get around 200 grams of fiber a day. And compared to the typical American diet, which is like maybe 15 grams of fiber, that's a huge difference.
It's crazy. And it's funny because in our culture, we're all obsessed with protein. We're all walking around thinking that we might be suffering from a protein deficiency. The truth is almost everyone is suffering from a fiber deficiency. And if we flip those words around, I think we'd all be better off. If people were like, did you get your fiber today? Did you get your fiber today? I mean, we would be in a different place.
I am so with you on that. Is my new motto. Did you get your fiber today? Because it is so incredibly important. And a good way to think about it for some people that don't really have a, grasp on why fiber is so important. When you eat protein, when you eat, fat, when you're eating these other sources of energy, even carbohydrates that are not like refined carbohydrates that don't have fiber, those things all get metabolized in the upper part of your intestine. They don't make it to the colon where all your bacteria are, probiotic bacteria, good bacteria, the commensal bacteria that are regulating the immune system, like you just mentioned. So what happens is, because you're getting protein and fat and refined carbs, those bacteria start to get hungry. Oh, what am I going to eat? I don't get the protein. I don't get the fat. So they actually start to eat what's called mucin, which is it's essentially the gut barrier. The gut barrier is made up of something called mucin, and it's mucin because it's kind of mucousy, kind of slippery, and it separates the immune cells from the bacteria in your gut, separates the food, from the internal part of your gut. So the gut barrier starts to get broken down by your own probiotic bacteria that are good for you because they're hungry because you've been starving them of fiber.
Right. They're so far down the conveyor belt that they're forced to basically cannibalize themselves.
Exactly.
And is that what causes leaky gut and
Yes.
all these sorts of issues where people are having all these, digestive disorders?
Yes. It causes a plethora of disorders. Leaky gut, it affects your immune system because now your immune system's all out of whack. Your gut barrier starts to break down. The immune cells start to see the bacteria. What do immune cells do when they see bacteria? They fire away. They're going to fire all that chemical warfare I was talking about. It creates more inflammation. You start to release, these things into your bloodstream, causes activation of, immune cells in your bloodstream that can affect your cholesterol. And, the lack of fiber, it's kind of like, I think it's like this insidious kind of damage that people they don't realize that it's like, oh, they may notice they may be constipated a little or, it's just, but they don't realize to what magnitude this sort of effect can have when it starts to compound over the years. Because it's really changing your immune system. It's causing inflammation. It's aging you. It's going to accelerate the way you age on every level. And it can lead to these diseases, these autoimmune related diseases, these diseases of aging, all sorts of problems start to happen. And I really think that you nailed it when there's a simple solution. That simple solution is you need to focus on getting fiber. I mean, that is my main obsession. It's fiber, and then I supplement some protein and fat and all that with fiber.
Fiber's at the top of the food pyramid for
It is
you.
the top.
That's so interesting.
And it's all different types of fiber because you've got, seeds, legumes, you've oats, vegetables, fruits, they all have different types of fiber. And what we're learning is that there are different types of fiber that are having different effects. So they're feeding different types of bacteria, and those bacteria are producing different types of chemical byproducts, which then do X, Y, or Z. So I mentioned the T regulatory cells, which are important for preventing autoimmune disease. They also make something called natural T killer cells, which are the most important type of immune cell that kills cancer cells in your body. And we're constantly getting little cancer cells that arise, and our immune system takes care of it.
Right.
It's it's sort of like a levels number, when we get more cancer cells than our immune system can handle, because our immune system's weak, because we're not making enough natural T killer cells or something like that, then it starts to get to the point where the cancer cells start to survive. They make it.
Gotcha. All right, good. So let's get back to inflammation in general. So we kind of have a working understanding of inflammation now. And what, in your opinion, are the leading kind of causes of inflammation, and what are the ways that we can, avoid these? Like, what are some daily habits that we can kind of undercut this chronic immune response that is making us sick?
So as I mentioned, I think one of the major drivers of inflammation is gut health and lack of fiber. That's really one of the major things. So making sure you're eating enough vegetables, getting enough, nuts, seeds, plants, legumes. Like, I think that's very, very important for controlling inflammation. And that's been, it's been shown that the gut is a major regulator of inflammation. So that's number one. That's easy, increase your intake of vegetables. The other easy, actionable for controlling inflammation is, believe it or not, actually causing acute inflammation through exercise. Because it is a hormetic, it's called a hormetic type of stress, where you're inducing stress. You're then activating all these anti-inflammatory genes. And this has been shown, like, about an hour after exercise, you have a really high elevation of these pro-inflammatory mediators. And then immediately after that, like a couple hours later, is a very strong anti-inflammatory response. So exercise is a really good way to boost the anti-inflammatory processes, the natural ones in your body.
Right. So it's like push-ups for your immune system as well as for your muscles.
Exactly. It really is. It really is. And the other one that I've really been obsessed with recently is curcumin. And curcumin is one of the curcuminoids that is found in turmeric.
Right. It's a root.
It's a root. And
what is the difference between that and turmeric?
Well, turmeric has many different curcuminoids in them, including curcumin. I like to now I mentioned the curcumin specifically because the curcumin is a very, very potent anti-inflammatory, but it doesn't work the way people may be thinking NSAIDs or, anti-inflammatory drugs. It works very differently because it's actually kind of like exercise. It's a hormetic stress. It's actually slightly toxic to us. And because it's slightly toxic to us, it turns on all these really potent anti-inflammatory genes, and it inhibits the pro-inflammatory ones as well. So curcumin is really, really good at doing that. But I want to just differentiate the difference between curcumin and turmeric. Turmeric is also very good because it's the source of curcumin. Curcumin's not as concentrated if you're taking the full turmeric, which you can buy, you can buy the root and have it fresh, or you can buy powder and cook with it. Curries and stuff often have turmeric in it. Or you can make tea, you can do lots of things with it. But what's really cool about turmeric is that in addition to curcumin, it has something in it called aromatic turmerone, which is another curcuminoid that has a completely different function than curcumin. The aromatic turmerone has been shown in studies to actually in the brain increase neural stem cells. So stem cells
Right. Wow.
in the brain to make more neurons. So it actually increases neural stem cells to what's called differentiate, which just means these stem cells become neurons. So it dramatically increased the number of neurons in little mice brains.
All right. So back to inflammation. So here we have increase your fiber. We have exercise. We have curcumin.
Yes.
And then beyond that, let's talk about sleep and other stress reduction techniques like meditation and the impact of that on reducing chronic inflammation.
Yes, I was just going there.
Oh,
you read
were?
my
Okay,
mind.
sorry
Yes.
about that.
Well, I've become sort of obsessed recently with circadian rhythm, or your biological clock, which is related to sleep. Humans are on a 24-hour light or day, night, dark cycle, where we're in the day when it's light out, we're active, we're working, we're exercising, we're thinking, we're, metabolically active. And at night when it's dark, typically we're, resting, sleeping. It's when we're repairing a lot of damage, things like that. But what is so interesting is that bright light exposure, early bright light exposure, is so incredibly important for setting your biological clock. It's like an anchor to set it so that it knows, okay, this is day, this is when day starts. And so this internal clock that you have regulates 15 to 20% of your entire genome. Many of those genes are involved in metabolism, inflammation.
Oh, that's a trip.
Tons. And it is completely regulated on just when, the amount of light you're exposed to, when you're exposed to it, and when it's dark. It's like this clock. And so recently I came across a study that showed when humans were exposed to really, really bright light, it was 10,000 lux, which is like the sun. When they're exposed to it, starting early for about 7 hours, that was able to reduce cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone cortisol, by up to 25% during the next day, during its peak phase.
Wow.
25%. So cortisol.
So translation, you need to be outside and exposed to the sun.
You need to be exposed
sitting
to light.
in your cubicle.
Yes, that's the translation. And just cortisol it causes massive inflammation. It's one of those stress hormones that activates almost every gene in the body that increases your immune cells to go fire, fire, fire. Cortisol does that. There's a reason it does that. It's a stress response. But if you are not being exposed to bright light because you live somewhere and it's dark in your house or your apartment, or you work a job where, you're just not able to be exposed to the light, it really can have detrimental effects on health. And we're talking about inflammation here. That's at the molecular level. That's what's going on. But it has a lot of effects on your ability to lose weight, to gain muscle mass, your mood, brain function, memory, learning. All these things. Tons and tons of studies have shown, cortisol, decreases muscle mass. It actually causes your muscles to atrophy, causes your brain to atrophy. This has all been shown experimentally.
Wow, that's amazing. So for the average person, though, most people are not able to be out in direct sunlight for 7 hours a day, right? So is there like a manageable solution for the average person?
Well, I do know that in terms of just setting the biological clock, being exposed to 7 hours a day, that specifically was referring to the 25% reduction in cortisol.
I got you.
But just being exposed to bright light for like 1 to 2 hours is enough to set your biological clock correctly, so that your metabolism's going the way it's supposed to, your inflammation's going the way it's designed. You're able to break down fat, you're able to build muscle mass, you're able to repair damage. All these things are being regulated by that biological clock. So that 1 to 2 hours is key for that, which is like sort of like the minimal effective dose.
Right. It's such a crazy thing that the circadian rhythm is like even exists. We walk around thinking that we've mastered nature, and we forget that we're just primal creatures, living in this basically in the wild, and that we're still, we still have to fall prey to these things